In Kellen Moore's recap of Saints OTAs 2025 week 2, some takeaways in there that I thought were pretty relevant and pretty interesting. We'll talk about those, and then I'm gonna throw in a fifth one that I discovered on overthecap.com that kind of shocked me a little bit. A lot of cover, so let's get to it. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. So, full disclosure before we get into kind of some of the comments and questions Kellen Moore talked about, the audio was terrible. Tried to watch this live. It's really tough to do. The Saints released on YouTube several hours later, kind of a cleaned up audio version. But I know there was some stuff in here that was missed. But I think the high points are kind of there, and I think it's a lot of the questions we were talking about recently in OTAs are going into OTAs about offensive line, what's going to happen to defensive line, some specific players. Alontae Taylor's role has been coming up a lot, and he addresses that. So let's go ahead and see what Kellen had to say.
It is tricky. A lot of their day is going to be spent in fundamentals and technique and a lot of individual work. The D-line's the same thing. So they're really, you're having to focus on the fundamentals. You're having to look at that and evaluate and see them continue to progress. And then once we get to walkthrough, that's where they're going to get their team component of it. And again, that setting is a controlled tempo. We're trying not to put ourselves in a compromised position. We don't want, a bunch of physical contact. That's not what this time of year is for. So that is their evaluation of, are they assignment sound? Do they know what they're doing? And so, that's the way this thing is set up at this time of year. And so I think our guys are handling it really well.
Now, played that part of it because, again, that's redundant. What we've been hearing coming from OTAs, it's not really getting into the physical. They talk about the classroom aspect of it and learning. And he's kind of setting the stage of showing how this is eventually going to get them ready, but without a whole lot of physical contact, as he says right now. So if you're like me, when you're hearing him talk about this, it's like, yeah, but this is a physical game. It's not so much a contact sport as a collision sport. And at some point, that has to be factored into this evaluation process. This is kind of where we're going with this part in the offensive line and some of the stuff he talks about. We kind of covered in the previous video the stuff that I think everybody thought was going to happen as about who was going to play where kind of played out. But how is this going to work? And I really wasn't expecting when I made that video a whole lot of coverage on this, but he gets into it. And as I'm questioning, well, how do you deal with not being physical in this part of the process, but understanding these guys, that's offensive line, they've got to be physical. How do you account for that? What do you do? Well, and I believe this was Nick Underhill asking these questions, but the follow up was really good. And this was kind of like, I'm going, there you go.
Guys, what are you guys looking for?
I'll just say Nugent and those guys, they got as many bells and whistles for those guys as they can possibly have. And so they do a great job. I think it's really good, resistance bands and all the different things just to, give yourself different, work on strength and different things where you have resistance, because obviously you're not getting the physical resistance that you normally would have with an opponent. So they do a lot of creative things.
And that answered that question. So basically the resistance bands that he's talking about, I did see some videos from, and I definitely want to address this, from the media availability when they were able to go to practice. And a couple came out on Twitter about the offensive line. Now, they weren't doing the resistance bands, but they were doing some kind of crazy physical stuff with the tackling sleds or something. I couldn't clearly get a shot on it, but I kind of understand now what that visual, what he's talking about is just, it's basically a simulation. We're trying to simulate contact. Now, the previous coaching staff, I have no idea if they were trying to get inventive with stuff like this or not, because their media, generally, from what I saw the last couple of seasons, generally the media availability portions, what they were able to film and kind of see and talk about was more like team ups or kind of one-on-one, straight one-on-one with players. I remember seeing a lot of that, especially last year in training camp and OTAs, with the pads or just, but not a lot of some of these simulated drills. And we'll talk about kind of quarterbacks a little later in this, but that was another video I saw of Tolzien putting the quarterbacks through just some crazy stuff as far as moving around and trying to throw the ball, etc. So point being is, and I think Ted Rath is a big part of this. He mentioned Brandon Nugent, our offensive line coach, and I think the coaching staff in general, because he also mentioned, hey, the defensive line is doing the same thing the offensive line is, trying to get creative with this, going, look, we've got to evaluate these guys. They've got a ton of work to do in that department, figuring out, look, we're making some changes here, but maybe not enough of the roster is what we need them to be able to do what we want to do. So we've got to find that medium ground. But trying to get into the physical aspects of it, it's a simulation. I get it. Which, just because you can simulate flying a plane doesn't mean you can jump behind a plane and fly it. I get it. But it's a starting point. It's something I think that's completely relevant to, hey, we're moving guys around both sides of the line of scrimmage, trying to figure out, can they handle, the classroom part of it, right? The assignment parts of it. Can they get all that down? Because if they don't get all that down, then nothing else is going to really matter until they do. Handle on that. But while they're doing that, evaluating, will they be physical enough to play? Will Trevor Penning be physical enough, and I'm sure he will be, to play left guard? Or if somebody's shuffling around on the defensive line and trying to figure out where they're going to play and in what situations, going, are they physical enough to handle it? Or do we have to look for somebody else in the team? Or do we have to go outside the organization? Or do we have to hold back on what we're trying to do schematically? Those are the kind of stuff where if you can answer some of that now and have the process, what he's talking about, getting into training camp with an idea that once it gets physical, kind of have an idea of what we have, what we think we need to see, what we're going to be looking for. If it all plays out and it works going forward, fantastic. If not, then we're going to have to move to plan B, C, D, or wherever we're at that point. Something I think previous coaching staffs, and I'm using plural again, could have a plan when the season starts, but as soon as things started going downhill for not working right, they couldn't adjust around it. I'm hoping these guys can, because it's going to happen. Now, that was just a little brief blurb at the beginning. There's about 5 minutes, starting somewhere around the 12-minute mark, where he was taking some really good follow-up questions along the same premise. And it was like 10 minutes after this. So I'm not going to show it because it's really going to tie up a lot of time in this video, but it starts about the 12-minute, a little past the 12-minute mark. But what he talked about at that point in the Q&A process, and that's why I mentioned Trevor Penning just now specifically. That's what they were asking about, that move to left guard, where he addressed, hey, look, he's going to be in a similar stance he's been in most of his career, playing left tackle, and what we're, they can get specific, but kind of sounded like what we're going to try to do up there. So that's why we thought in this process he could handle that move. We wanted to do it early, something he addressed last week, get going in this process. And I think a lot of it is the classroom, the mental part, making sure all these guys are on the right page. But we go back to what he talked about just now in that clip, going, but we're figuring out ways to see how physical and how much they can handle. Also says in this point is the monitoring. God, I can't talk. Sorry about that. That Ted Rath has to do to make sure they're not pushing these guys past the physical limit, because they don't want them to miss time, obviously, but finding that balance of what they can do, what they should do, but getting the players ready for the season, both mentally and physically, but at the same time, not putting in a position where the I word is going to come up and have any kind of setbacks, because they really are consciously trying to avoid that. And this goes into the offensive line fit. There was a couple questions going back and forth on that, but basically it boils down to they were asking, how soon was this the plan? When did you come up with this plan pre-draft? And they were asking questions about, did it all come together once we drafted Kelvin Banks Jr. at the 9 spot? And he all but, again, going back to my previous video, and I'll put it up here somewhere where you can click on it, This is all stuff we speculated kind of happening during that process, kind of going, look, if it wasn't Banks, they had some guys up there and thinking left tackle, depending on what was still available that was taken um, in the previous 8 picks, that was a spot they were really looking hard on, that they wanted to fix this offensive line. They felt like they had some good pieces in place. They just needed to get an extra piece and then figure out how these pieces are going to come together to form that offensive line and come up with a plan. And in 5 minutes back and forth, that's basically what he said, including the pre-draft process, including what was going on in the evaluation process of that, in that he all but admitted the second they drafted Banks, they this was the plan. What you're seeing now, and right now, their plan is to do everything they can right now to make sure that when they get to training camp, I mean, he basically all but said this also, that it has the best chance to work. So they're starting the process early, and that was one of the follow-ups that got to the point. Follow-up questions that got to the point of, yeah, that process basically started when we realized we got Calvin Banks. We got a left tackle from a great college with a lot of film, a lot of play time under him that we feel pretty certain is going to be able to play left tackle, and then let's slide in the pieces from there. The next part, and this kind of plays into a little bit, we were talking about the offensive line, but addressing the defensive line that's undergoing a lot of changes in a lot of areas, actually. Everywhere from scheme to who's playing where to what's it going to look like, right? And what's primary responsibilities of people who are having to change, not necessarily position, but the way they're going to have to play the position, because going from a 3-4 to or a 4-3 to a 3-4 odd to even type scenario. So he gets into that a little bit.
That group can perform at a high level, and what have you seen from them so far?
They've done a nice job. I think Bo, Jay, BY, they got three of the best in the league you can possibly have from a coaching perspective. And so we feel like that group's going to be able to develop really, really well. Guys that were here, we certainly added some pieces via trade, free agency, and the draft. And so we feel like we got some depth there that we're excited to let these guys roll. And obviously a lot of their evaluation comes in training camp, just because that's when the pads come on and you get to evaluate that. And obviously the run game is going to be a huge factor of that on both sides of the football.
So right, no real nuggets of big bit of information there or anything, but specifically what I take from that is Bo Davis, the defensive line coach, Jay Rogers coaching the edge players, and then Brian Young, assistant D line coach, which he was last year. But just to reiterate, when Rizzi took over as interim, he promoted Todd Grantham to something that wasn't on the field coaching anymore, who eventually Grantham gets hired to go back to college and coordinate defenses there. So Brian Young moved up to the interim defensive line coach to fill in for him. And I think from this group, Davis, Rogers, and Young, we know a little bit from last year, specifically Cam Jordan right away had mentioned almost immediately when they were asking him about it, how it was more aggressive and Young, what they were doing with Young in charge of that, more aggressive and less technical and worried about this scheme and that scheme and all, and more just, hey, look, go apply pressure.
4 versus 4-3, but when you see these defensive ends that you have, Chase Young, Carl Granderson, Cam Jordan, Isaiah Foskey.
Okay, I love Mike Triplett, but he was getting a little wordy there with the questions. I'm going to speed it up a little in a second to get to Kellen Moore. But basically, the gist of it was, hey, you have a bunch of guys that were 4-3 edge rushers, scheme fit for what we've been trying to do, and now for the most part, that's who you're going to be relying on, Young and Granderson specifically, to bring the edge rush that you're looking for. Most teams look for in a 3-4 or an odd man front. How do you reconcile that? Basically, how's that going to work?
Their number one objective, they're edge rushers. Their job is to rush the quarterback, and we're never going to lose sight on that.
And that was something that differs totally from what DA was saying, because his edge guys in that 4-3, and look, this isn't a bang. It's just the style of football they were playing. But it was more of, hey, they have to set the edge in the run game a lot of the times too. And his thing was, if you stop the run, you earn the right to rush the passer. which again, I'm not necessarily saying is a bad thing. That was just the style of defense that they played, and it was very effective for a long time. But also, the NFL just kind of tends to evolve, and you see these dedicated look. The defense understands they're unleashing a guy whose job is primarily to go sack the quarterback, as Kellen Moore's about ready to talk about. We'll figure out schematically how we're going to kind of cover that run, defend the run portion of it.
That's the number one priority and objective of that position. I think our guys are creating a little bit of diversity and different tools in their toolbox. Their ability to play some coverage game on occasion, just as change-ups. And I think that's going to allow us to create matchups for some other guys. Whether you're blitzing linebackers, now you get Demario and Pete and those guys. Now they're able to rush the passer and play against maybe a favorable matchup against a running back. Now it allows those guys to play coverage, and I think they've handled it really, really well. That's a benefit of the setting of this. Is 7-on-7. We can get those guys to get used to some of that coverage components, and so but again, we're never going to lose sight on those guys are really good edge rushers, and they're going to rush the passer.
And look, that was a candid answer, way more than I ever thought I would hear. And again, it's not like he's giving away deep, dark trade secrets. What he's just kind of acknowledging there, and I think the plan is with Brandon Staley, and listen to some of the players talk over the last couple of weeks in OTAs and especially Thursday after practice, you're getting the feeling that this is more conventional move too. We were expecting maybe a mixed front because we had so much personnel who's more, especially on the defensive line, geared for that 4-3 even man look, as opposed to moving more to the odd man look that's more prevalent around the league, and definitely what Brandon Staley has always done as a coordinator of defense. But I think what he's really letting on there is kind of along that, hey, primarily they're pass rushes. Now look, they're going to do some coverage stuff, a little bit of a change up, and while that's going on, that should open up some other opportunities. He mentioned Pete Werner and Demario Davis in a way that's more like you see, that I can tell anyway, modern NFL defenses going, look, everybody's kind of got a primary role in how we're going to set this up, but you can't keep doing the same thing over and over all game because offense is going to get wise to it, right? Or they're going to counter it, or you're really setting up a game plan for them where they may not have to do anything because they kind of know what you're going to do on every play defensively based on down and distance and the personnel you throw out on the field. But I'm thinking back to a lot of what Staley had going his 1 year with the Rams, and he was trying to do an awful lot of with the Chargers his 3 years there. And a lot of people kind of dinged him for this. So we'll see if it works or not. But that ability to not be set in that, the linebacker and the secondary, using some interchangeable parts there and trying to keep his edge rushers getting after the quarterback and kind of using everybody else to settle the rest of that. Look, he's going off the edge to bring pressure. Who's got the outside run? Is the linebacker? We pulling up a defensive back? Whatever. Something we didn't do a whole lot of last year. The thing I'll close this with that we kept seeing over and over last year and in the last few years, and I think it's one of the reasons why we were just, and I do mean one of the reasons why we were so one-dimensional in the way we did things a lot of times, and we stayed with it. And in the words of Dennis Allen post-game, I believe it was the Atlanta loss last year, where he did say, look, it's been working for 58 minutes. Why would we change it for the last two? I don't know. Situational football, the other team makes adjustments. You keep doing the same thing over and over, and it's not working. They're going to go, well, okay, we're going to have to make some changes to get it to work. You understand what I'm saying here? A lot of the flexibility to the scheme that this coaching staff is talking about on both sides of the ball. I think this plays into it where he's saying everybody's going to have the primary roles. We're going to ask them to do some other stuff to change up, but everybody's going to have to be flexible. But Brandon Staley's scheme is trying to account for, while we're being flexible and interchanging some roles around the defense line, we're not trying to put anybody in a bad position. Or as TJ Pagnetti said, I'm going to keep using this line because I love it. We're not in the business of putting guys in positions where they're going to suck. Sorry, TJ, but I am stealing that line. Now, this one's a real quick one, but I think it is massively, hugely important. First time I've really heard Kellen Moore admit this, but about the versatility and how they're going to use Alontae Taylor. I think Alontae Taylor is going to be a very key cog in what they're trying to do defensively, and I think rightfully so, because I've been banging the drum on this now for a while going into last season, seeing how that season played out. I think he gives us the best chance to have a playmaker back there in the secondary. I don't know, running around and making plays consistently. However you plan on using him, use him to that point. You know, I got a little aggravated at the end of last year. Now, I get it. We were running out of cornerbacks, but we put him back in the outside kind of in a shutdown corner mode. He got picked on a little bit because teams didn't really want to go the other way at McKinstry. They were testing him. But I'm like, yes, he's going to have to do some of that, and they acknowledge this when they talk about it. But I think the biggest thing with Alontae is, look, we got to get him in positions where he's going to make plays, not only in the secondary, but in and around the line of scrimmage also.
Definitely provide a lot of flexibility for us, and I think that's one thing that, from a defense perspective, we've emphasized these guys being able to line up in multiple ways. Alontae is one of the primary guys about that. His ability to play the star position, which is really the nickel position, as most people learn it, and the outside corner position. So he's going to be able to do both, and that's going to be able to allow us to play some matchup football when we need to play matchup football. And I think he does a really good job. He's good against the run. He's a really, really good blitzer. I think that's shown up, and so he's got a lot of tools.
So I'm encouraged to see where we can try to move him back into more of a playmaking role and move him around, and acknowledging he's going to have to play some on the outside, but that's okay. Okay. But blitzing around the line in the run game, we know he can go get some balls. He's done it over his career where he's really made plays on the balls for a couple of interceptions that he's had or knocked balls away. So I think he's a very important, if you want to be flexible, piece back there. And they're talking about the star, as in that's what they named the position, that nickel corner, some version of it, that where, much like he was doing at the beginning of last year and CJ Deuce used to do for us, it's almost like a hybrid strong safety, outside linebacker, nickelback, slot corner type role, all kind of merged into one where you can use them in a lot of different areas. And even going back off the line of scrimmage as another safety if you need to, or playing on the outside. You know who did that really well under the Brandon Staley system for 3 years? And I am no way saying that Alontae Taylor is this guy, but that's what Derwin James did, and was, when he was healthy, you talk about a disruptive force. It was insane. Okay, what he could do on the field, can still do when you can get him in those positions. I'm not saying Alontae Taylor is Derwin James, but what's to say that he can't start approaching that playmaking ability that Kellen Moore is talking about? And if he could, somebody as disruptive like that in that type of role can change outcomes of the game like that. And that's what the Saints have really been missing the last couple of seasons. So if you can't be the team that can hold the other team down in yardage and points, well, you better start making up that difference somewhere else, whether it's sacks, turnovers, or whatever. And you need a guy like Alontae Taylor, in my opinion. He's the guy in the secondary that's going to help you, accomplish that goal from back there. This is actually two very small questions that were asked that kind of rolls in together. But Kellen Moore on play calling, there was two things that came up. One of them was a question about off-platform throws, that somebody asked, said, hey, from what we saw in the media portion of practice today, that y'all are actually working on the quarterbacks doing drills for off-platform throws. Kellen Moore said, absolutely. Because he acknowledged, hey, in a perfect world, we would just want our quarterbacks to stay back in the pocket on platform and make throws all over the field, but that's never going to happen. They are going to be forced to move around and make some of these kind of crazy throws. Look, Patrick Mahomes is the absolute GOAT of being able to do stuff like this, that it's so insane it's not even funny. But the idea being, look, what he can do, we need to get our quarterbacks comfortable with some ability to do some of that stuff because it's going to happen. It's going to be the only way that they can realistically get rid of a ball, maybe even to throw it away, but much less to actually get downfield, try to hit somebody, or on a check down, try to hit a running back to try to keep the chains moving with positive yards in the passing game. Now, where this tied in was a little later on. He was asked specifically about RPOs, run pass option. He said RPRs, so I'm not sure what the second R stands for, but what he was describing is he said, look, we're working on this, and this kind of ties into having the ability to throw off platform because he's like, it's very strong in the college game. He mentioned Tyler Shuck. He mentioned specifically talking off platform throws, and then mentioned specifically in this conversation RPOs or RPRs, as he was calling them, saying, look, that is something that colleges use all the time. It's something that's being added into the pro game. He said it's not necessarily something with a set of rules where it's basically he was saying where they see this, they react this way, they do this. So it's more of like living in the gray area where you just need the reps. You just kind of have to learn when those situations present itself. What am I going to do with the ball? And I think this ties into the RPOs, RPR, all platform throws, kind of get tied in together because he's acknowledging, look, in the modern NFL, you need quarterbacks with some type of mobility. Now, better quarterbacks, it's varying degree that you've got the true kind of 50-50 run pass guys, and some of them designed. And he coached one last year, and there's another one in Baltimore, and they're both great at it. They can kill you running the ball just as much as they can throwing off the running. So it's almost like they have the run pass option with a little option to keep it themselves. Or whether it's the guys that they're not necessarily a running threat, but they are a mobile threat. They can move around back there, opening up that run pass option and always keeping them as a threat of being the 11th guy on the offense that the defense has to account for. Where it's no longer a deal of, look, keep him in the pocket. Or it's like now, look, whether you keep him in the pocket or you let him out of the pocket, it doesn't matter. You still have to account for him. We're still defending on 11 on 11 instead of 11 on 10 because we know the statue is going to sit in there and not go anywhere. So, a couple takeaways from there is this is something I wish we would have seen more last year. I thought we were going to see more last year in the Kubiak offense, but I get with all the stuff that went on injury wise and everything else, it just may not have been as much as available option as we wanted. But it's something that desperately needs to get into the Saints offense. And I think it's basically acknowledged, yes, we're going to do more of this stuff. I'm going to play call it. Had a lot of success with it last year, obviously. Now, to get anywhere near that success, obviously, segment one, you offensive line's got to get better, got to situate your quarterback play and everything else. But we know now, I think we're confidently finding out more and more where the plan is to take this team, kind of reasonable expectation of how they want to do it. The only thing we don't really know is, well, two things. If it can be done, how long is it going to take? Or, I hate to say it, find out that it won't work. So, my fifth takeaway is actually not from directly from OTAs or the press conference on Thursday, but from an article I stumbled across on overthecap.com by Jason Fitzgerald, which he was basically looking at the 2025 roster turnover for all 32 teams. And he started with their roster at the end of 2024, their final roster of players left before the offseason began, and then compared it to what their roster was at the start of their OTAs. So that in mind, I was quite shocked to see that the Saints numbers, and at first I disbelieved it, but as far as I can tell, he's pretty accurate, that we've already turned over roughly a quarter of our total roster. According to his math, 76.1% is still here from the end of the 2024 season. The rest have moved on. Breaks down to about 74.2% from defense, 75.8% from the offense. So roughly a quarter. And it felt like we weren't turning our roster, at least to me, very much less roughly a quarter of it. At the end of the 2024 season, now he didn't provide the data. I had to try to go look it up. And I think what I figured out, in numbers are relatively close if this is true. We had 53, obviously 53 active players on the roster at the end of the season. We had 14 on injured reserve, and we had 2 that were exempt. Total of 69 players. Looks like we returned about 51 of those as of the start of our OTAs. Now, the next thing that piqued my interest, and that's kind of when I backed away from his data, because his next 2 data points and graphs that he was discussing centered on, he was looking at players with a 30% contribution rate. What he was calling was 30% of the snaps. Which I don't think we had enough players with all the horrific issues we had going on injury wise and everything else during the 2024 season to qualify with 30% of the snaps. So, and even if we did, a lot of those would be guys probably we weren't expecting more to take more than 5 or 10% of snaps, basically just a special teams version of it that were thrust upon them to get a lot of game time. So kind of backed off from some of the roster turnover points he was bringing up from there. But just looking at that initial 75%, I said, well, let me go look now and see what their status is going to be at the end of 2025 going into 2026. Basically, at the start of 2026 free agency period, what's our numbers going to look like? Well, actually, 2 are going to be coming off in Derek Carr and Ryan Ramczyk roughly Monday or sometime thereafter when they retire. So it knocks it down a little bit. But our free agents, as of the beginning of the 2026 season, are going to be Cedric Wilson, Alontae Taylor, Trevor Penning, Hugo Amadi, John Ridgeway, Landon Young, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Dante Pettis. 8 players. An additional 8 players have voided contracts in 2026, much like Chase Young and Juwan Johnson did at the beginning of 2025, where had we not brought him back with the restructure, new contract situation thing that we kind of did, they would have been free agents and out the door and eligible to sign with anyone. Well, we have 8 players on that list. Taysom Hill will be on it. So will Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, Foster Moreau, Rashid Shaheed, JT Gray, and Kalen Saunders. Now, obviously, there's some names on here we're probably going to be looking to potentially re-sign or extend. But for the most part, if you take away the 2 retired players plus the 16 basic free agents going into 2026, 33 players as it currently stands that were on our roster at the end of 2024 would still be under contract in 2026. That's 50% of your roster turnover if you have to go the route of replacing them. So I was just wrongly, I guess, thinking the whole time, man, this is moving so slow to get this roster turned over, when no, it seems like it's going to be a little more expedient process than I was expecting over that 2-year span, because I think that's what everybody's kind of figuring the rebuild about how long it's going to take. So we're going to be bringing players in. We've already started, obviously. We got to do a good job of it. They've got to hit. The salary and a lot of them are right. And so hopefully by hit, I mean, we're going to be extending some players as our cash flow comes up, in addition to signing free agents, that maybe, just maybe, if we do a good job of doing that, we can have a lot higher expectations for 2026 than we currently, or at least I currently have right now for 2025. First time here, you like what you saw, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up, do all the bells and whistles and the notifications. Everything makes the algorithm happy and gives me a chance to feed the algorithm and see all of y'all on a regular basis. So till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.